In this video we are going to make this simple coffee table for my mum using no domino this time, all using traditional mortise and tenon joinery. The tabletop again is going to be from the pre-laminated Tassie oak benchtop material, but the process would be the same whether you were doing pre-laminated stuff like this or regular boards of timber. First we need to cut a rough length. In this case it's going to be 600mm long by wide table, so I need several pieces to laminate together to get the width that I need. So the easiest way to do this is using a crosscut sled on a table saw, although you could use a circular saw or track saw to get everything to length. This is what I've got. This is the easiest way for me. So I'm not going to go to the exact dimensions, just so it's a little bit easier to clean up at the end. If things slip during the gluing process, it's easier if I've got a little bit to trim off. So I'm going to set this to 610. And to get the width that I need, as this board is just over 200, I'm going to need 3 of these to get everything the correct size and shapes. Next I took the material for the legs and broke it down into more manageable lengths. As the legs are going to be fairly chunky at 60mm square, I'm going to have to laminate 2 pieces together, so I ripped the length I cross-cut in the previous step. Don't throw away that offcut though, as that'll be perfect for the apron. The panel to form the top has to be glued, so I laid it out on some budget parallel clamps, spread a good layer of glue and clamped it up, lining up my terrible triangles. Because the surfaces are nice and square, only the bare minimum pressure was needed to close up the joints, which meant fewer clamps needed. Squeeze out was then wiped off with a damp rag. A healthy amount of glue is put on 2 of the leg pieces only. The glue is then spread out using a plastic putty knife. The 2 sections with glue are stood up, then everything is clamped together. Because there is no glue between the 2 sets, they won't become stuck together, and it lets me use less clamps to get the job done. Speaking of clamps, a few more are added for good measure, then the squeeze out is wiped off with a wet rag. It wouldn't be one of Mum's projects without yet more design changes, even after she apparently signed off on the design, so I had to trim the tabletop down to 550 by 550. Using a stop block attached to the fence, I was able to trim the ends of the legs. Referencing off a stop block allows repeatability without running the risk of binding against the fence. To cut the legs to the correct length of 400mm, I put the stop block on the crosscut sled this time. As the blade can't extend the full 60mm to get through the leg, I need to flip it over between cuts. This means a stop block really is required rather than just eyeballing a reference line. The apron rails are cut in the same way. My material was 32mm thick, so when I laminated it together, it was a little bit too thick. A quick trip to the thickness edge gets this sorted. Normally this is where I'd use dominoes, but as I mentioned, this is a regular tenon and mortise project. I like to cut the mortises first, then size the tenons to them, as it's a little easier doing a single pass with the router to get the mortise width rather than doing several passes to fine tune it to a tenon. I clamped 2 legs to the workbench and marked out where I wanted one of the mortises to go. If your mortises are near the top or the bottom of a workpiece, clamping a second workpiece of the same dimension makes it much easier to balance the router. After aligning the router bit properly, I drew reference lines of the start and end position of the router base. By measuring these lines, it's much quicker to transfer the layout to all the other legs. Then it's just a matter of plunging a small amount at a time and going back and forth. The bit I used really isn't great at plunging, and unfortunately it's the only 1/2 inch wide bit I've got, and a spiral upcut bit would be a much better choice. To cut the tenons, I'm using my crosscut sled with a dado blade. My crosscut sled has replaceable zero clearance inserts in it which make it very versatile. I can do regular crosscuts, dado cuts, or angled cuts with the one sled. I use the test piece to dial in the perfect height for the dado blade, testing it in one of the mortises as I go. After dialing in that perfect fit, I set up a stop block on the crosscut sled that tells me the maximum distance I want of my tenons. Remember to measure from the furthest edge of the kerf line, not the closest, otherwise you'll have a much longer tenon. Then it's just a matter of cutting away at the tenon 1/2 inch at a time, then flipping. I also flip it onto the short edge to cut all the shoulders. You may notice that a square tenon won't fit too well in a round mortise. There is 2 ways to address this, either square the mortise up or the way I prefer, which is to round over the tenon. Using a sharp chisel, it's fairly quick and easy to pare away the material to get it rounded. I made sure I did a dry assembly for every mortise and tenon combo to correct for any variance. Some footage was lost and I wasn't able to show assembly, but the process isn't overly complex. Apply glue on the mortises and on the tenons and then clamp. Finishing followed the same process as the rest of Mum's furniture, which is 2 coats of brushed on Minuac satin polyurethane followed by a single wiped on coat of thinned polyurethane. I start with the underside first, then do around the perimeter before flipping the tabletop. This prevents any drips from forming on the show side. Alright, now comes the slightly embarrassing part of this build. I need to attach the top to the apron, and I typically like to use these Z-clips. These are very inexpensive and work really well. I've used them on the rest of the furniture for Mum. The embarrassment is that I forgot to take care of these before assembling it. What I was planning on doing originally was using the router table and cutting a little groove where this will slot in. As I've done it after the fact, I obviously can't use the router table. I also can't use my regular router as I don't have a slot cutting bit, and it's just too awkward with a router to route a groove for it on the inside of an apron. I also can't find my biscuit jointer. I think it's under the house somewhere. It's been put in deep storage. It's not a tool I typically use all that often anymore. So although this is a domino free project, I have to use the domino to cut these slots. Alternatively, I could drill an enlarged hole or an elongated hole in the apron and screw directly through. Now that would allow the wood movement still, so the screw could angle. After positioning the table where I want, I use the scratch hole that I made in my last project to mark out where I need to drill or pre-drill the holes for the screws. I then reinsert the clips and screw it down to the table. Alright, and as you can see, that holds the tabletop on very firmly. Those clips work great and they allow for wood movement because of the slots in the rails. I actually made two of these, one with a domino and one without, and if you've got a domino, without a doubt it is the right choice for this project because the other one flew by, and this was much slower to make. And I will cover more on that on a wrap-up video in the future. Thanks for watching.